Hi, and welcome to ELP, your daily escape into English stories. My name is Jonathan. If you've been learning English for a while, you know it's not just about grammar, it's about feeling the language. And stories like today's help you do exactly that. Think about it. When a child learns their first language, they don't memorize rules. They just listen over and over until words come naturally. That's what we'll do here, learn without even realizing it. And today's story is truly special. It's about a CEO who took her mute daughter to the playground and froze when a single dad made her speak for the very first time. A moment that changed everything. So, relax, imagine the scenes in your mind. Which word in today's story did you find difficult or hear for the first time? Share it with us in the comments. We'd love to know. And let's step into the story together. The morning light spilled gently over Pine Hollow Park like honey poured across the earth, gilding the edges of swings, slides, and climbing frames with a warm, golden glow. Birds chirped in the trees, their songs stitching through the crisp autumn air. Children ran, shrieking with delight, their laughter bouncing off the bark-covered ground like pebbles skipping across water. A little boy in a red hat spun wildly on the merry-go-round, arms outstretched, face lifted to the sky as if trying to catch the wind in his hands. Nearby, a mother clapped as her toddler took wobbly steps across the sandbox, giggling with each unsteady lunge. But in the middle of all this motion, 7-year-old Lena Carter sat perfectly still. She perched on a rust-colored swing, her small feet tucked beneath her, hands gripping the cold metal chains so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The seat creaked faintly as a breeze nudged it, but she didn't push off. She didn't move at all. Her dark eyes, wide and deep like pools under moonlight, scanned the park without really seeing it. She was there, but not there. Not fully. For 3 years, Lena hadn't spoken a single word. Not when her preschool teacher asked her name on the first day. Not when her classmates sang, "Happy Birthday," with candles lit. Not even when her mother, Dr. Maya Carter, held her through the night after another failed therapy session, whispering, "It's okay, baby. I'm here." Silence had wrapped itself around Lena like a second skin the night her father disappeared. It was a stormy October evening, rain slashing sideways, thunder cracking like broken bones overhead. He'd gone out to fix the porch light, muttering about loose wiring. 10 minutes later, a deafening crash echoed from the driveway. Maya found his coat soaked in the mud, the front windshield of their car shattered, and no sign of him. The police searched for weeks. They found tire marks, a broken flashlight, and blood on the curb. But no body. No answers. And from that night on, Lena stopped speaking. Maya sat on a nearby bench, her tablet open to a medical journal she wasn't reading. Her eyes kept drifting to her daughter, watching, waiting, hoping. As a pediatric neurologist, she'd spent sleepless nights researching selective mutism, trauma-induced aphasia, even rare neurological disorders. She'd taken Lena to speech therapists, child psychologists, sound integration specialists. She'd tried music, art, animal therapy. Nothing broke the silence. And so, every Saturday, she brought Lena to this park. Not because Lena loved it. Not because it made her smile. But because it was normal. Because other children laughed here. Because life moved forward, even if hers felt frozen in time. Then, something shifted. A man stepped into view near the sandbox. He wore a worn olive jacket, frayed at the cuffs, and moved with a quiet slowness, one leg dragging just slightly behind the other. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and deep lines framed his eyes, lines that spoke of long nights and heavier days. He knelt beside a little girl with curly pigtails and helped her climb onto the monkey bars, his hand steady, his voice low and calm. He didn't cheer, didn't clap, just waited, arms out, ready to catch her if she fell. When he turned and saw Maya watching, he didn't look away. He didn't force a smile or pretend he hadn't noticed. Instead, he gave a small, quiet nod, like he knew exactly what it meant to carry silence. Like he, too, had learned to speak without words. And in that moment, something deep inside Maya trembled. Not hope. Not yet. But the faintest whisper of possibility. The air in Pine Hollow Park had grown still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The laughter of children, the creak of swings, the distant hum of traffic, all of it seemed to fade into a soft, muffled hush. It was as though the park had become a stage, and all eyes, though unaware, were fixed on a single moment about to unfold. Eli moved slowly toward Lena, his cane tapping lightly against the gravel path. He didn't rush, didn't loom. He stopped a few feet from her swing, knelt with care, his injured leg bending stiffly, and rested his hands on his knees. His eyes, warm and steady like embers in fading firelight, met hers. Lena didn't look away. "You know," he began, his voice low and smooth, like wind brushing through tall grass, "I once met a squirrel who only talked when it rained." A pause. The words hung in the air, strange and unexpected. Not a question. Not a demand. Just a story. Lena blinked. Her fingers twitched against the cold metal chains. "He didn't say much," Eli went on, glancing up at the pale blue sky. "Never chattered like the others. Just sat on the fence, watching. But when the first drop fell, he'd turn his head, look right at me, and whisper one word." He leaned in slightly, not too close, just enough to let her know he was listening before she even spoke. "Now." Another silence. The breeze tugged gently at Lena's dark hair, lifting a few strands like whispers trying to escape. A leaf spiraled down from an oak tree and landed softly at her feet. Then, so quiet it might have been the wind, so fragile it could have broken in the air, she spoke. "Why?" The word was barely a breath. A thread of sound spun from a heart long sealed shut. But Maya heard it. She froze. Her book slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground with a soft thud. Her breath caught, trapped in her chest like a bird startled mid-flight. Her heart, oh, her heart, hammered against her ribs, fast and wild, as if trying to make up for 3 years of stillness in a single, thunderous beat. She spoke. Lena had spoken. Tears burned behind Maya's eyes, hot and sudden. She pressed a hand to her mouth, afraid that if she moved, if she made a sound, the moment would shatter like glass. But Eli didn't react with shock. Didn't smile too wide or cheer. He simply nodded, as if he'd been waiting for this word all along. "Because," he said, his voice soft but sure, "some voices don't need to be loud to be true." Lena stared at him, and for the first time in 3 years, her eyes, those deep, quiet pools, changed. The emptiness that had haunted them, the distant fog of grief and fear, began to lift. In its place flickered something new. Something alive. Curiosity. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand not just the words, but the man who said them. Who was he? Why did he speak so gently? Why didn't he look at her like she was broken? A breeze passed between them, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Somewhere, a child laughed. A dog barked. Life moved on. But in that small space beneath the old maple tree, time had stopped. And then, almost too quietly to believe, Lena whispered again. Again. Eli smiled, not with triumph, not with pity, but with deep, quiet understanding. He leaned back slightly, giving her room, giving her time. "Okay," he said. "Once more." And just like that, the silence that had ruled Lena's world for 3 long years began, ever so gently, to crack. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the playground, turning the gravel paths into ribbons of gold and gray. The air had cooled, carrying the crisp scent of autumn, damp earth, dry leaves, and the faint trace of wood smoke from a distant chimney. Children's voices began to fade as parents called out names, gathering their little ones for home. But at the edge of the park, near the old wooden slide half hidden by ivy, time seemed to stretch, slow and tender, as if reluctant to let go of the moment. Lena still sat on the swing, but now her hands had loosened their grip on the chains. Her shoulders, once hunched and stiff like a bird afraid to fly, had relaxed. Her eyes, still wide, still cautious, were fixed on Eli, the man in the olive jacket who had spoken to her like she was already someone worth listening to. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't begged her to say more. He just stayed, kneeling in the gravel, patient as a tree rooted in earth. And then, after a long silence filled with unspoken understanding, Lena's lips moved again. "What's your name?" she asked. Her voice was fragile, trembling like a leaf caught in a breeze, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind. But it was real. It was hers. Maya stood frozen on the bench, one hand pressed to her chest, her breath shallow. She had dreamed of this moment for 3 years, imagined it in quiet hospital hallways, in therapy offices, in the dark hours before dawn. But now that it was happening, it felt too delicate to believe. Like a soap bubble floating just out of reach, beautiful and ready to burst. Eli didn't rush. He leaned back slightly, giving her space, respecting the weight of her words. "I'm Eli," he said, his voice calm and warm. "And this," he turned and gestured to the little girl now swinging beside him, "is my niece, Sophie, my sister's daughter." Sophie, a wiry girl with wild curls and a grin missing 2 front teeth, stopped mid-swing and beamed. "I can do a handstand on the monkey bars," she announced, as if this fact alone proved she was the most important person in the park. Lena blinked. Then, slowly, she looked from Sophie to Eli, then back to Sophie. A flicker, so brief it might have been missed, passed across her face. Was it amusement? Surprise? Maybe even the shadow of a smile? I'm Lena," she whispered. The words hung in the air like dew on a spiderweb, tiny, fragile, but glistening with meaning. Eli's eyes softened. Not with pity, not with triumph, but with something deeper, recognition. As if he had been waiting not just to hear her speak, but to see her, truly, for the first time. "Nice to meet you, Lena," he said, nodding slowly. "Want to see something cool?" He pointed toward the back of the park, where an old wooden slide stood beneath a curtain of ivy, its paint peeling, its steps worn smooth by generations of small feet. "That one's magic," Eli said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Only works if you believe in quiet." Lena didn't move at first. Her fingers curled slightly around the swing chains, as if holding on to the safety of stillness. But then she looked at Sophie, who was now standing beside her, holding out a small, grubby hand. "It's okay," Sophie said. "I'll go first." And with that, she ran off, giggling, up the wooden steps. Lena hesitated. Her eyes flicked to her mother, who gave the tiniest nod, no pressure, no urging, just love. Then, slowly, like a flower opening after a long winter, Lena stood. Maya's breath caught. Her daughter hadn't taken an unguided step toward another child in years. Not since before the storm. Not since the silence swallowed her whole. But now, with Eli watching quietly and Sophie waiting at the top of the slide, Lena took one small step. Then another. And as she walked, slow, uncertain, but moving, the park didn't erupt in cheers. No one clapped. But in Maya's heart, a dam broke. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Not from sorrow, not from fear, but from the quiet rising truth that her daughter was coming back. The afternoon sun slanted through the large front windows of Maggie's diner, painting warm rectangles across the checkerboard floor. The air smelled of sizzling butter, cinnamon toast, and strong coffee, comfort in scent form. A jukebox in the corner played a soft country tune, barely louder than the clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, where people came not just to eat, but to be. At a corner booth near the window, Sophie and Lena sat side by side, their heads nearly touching as they leaned over a shared plate of golden fries. Sophie was showing Lena how to dip a fry just right, not too much ketchup, or it falls off. Just a tiny tip. And Lena, eyes wide with focus, copied her exactly. Then, when she succeeded, a soft, breathy giggle escaped her lips. Maya watched from across the table, her heart full and aching all at once. She hadn't heard Lena laugh, even this quietly, in 3 years. It was a sound so small, yet it echoed through her like a bell ringing after years of silence. Eli sat beside her, stirring his black coffee with a slow, deliberate hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, marked by old scars that told stories without words. He didn't drink, just watched the girls, his expression soft, like a man seeing light after a long night. Maya finally broke the quiet. "How did you know what to say?" she asked, her voice low, almost reverent. "With Lena. Most people, they try to fix her. They talk too much, push too hard. But you just spoke and she answered." Eli didn't answer right away. He set the spoon down, folded his hands, and watched Sophie carefully guide Lena's hand to draw a smiley face on a napkin with a crayon. "My sister," he said at last, his voice quiet but steady, stopped talking after her husband died. Maya's breath caught. "It was gun violence," Eli went on. "Right outside her grocery store. 1 second he was there, laughing about buying the wrong kind of bread. The next, gone. And Sophie," he glanced at his niece, who was now proudly showing Lena her drawing. "She saw it all. She was standing right beside him." A heavy silence settled between them, thick with grief and understanding. "She hasn't spoken since," Eli said. 2 years now. Not a word." Maya's chest tightened. She looked at Sophie, her bright eyes, her missing teeth, her fearless grin, and suddenly saw the pain beneath the surface. The weight a child shouldn't have to carry. "But she listens," Eli continued. "And sometimes, when I sit with her in silence, she'll tap my arm. Or hand me a drawing. Or lean her head on my shoulder. That's her voice." He turned to Maya, his eyes deep and clear. "Kids don't need to be fixed. They need to feel safe. They need someone who isn't afraid of their silence." Just then, Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. With careful hands, she unfolded it and slid it across the table to Lena. It was a drawing, crayon on notebook paper. A stick figure girl on a swing. A tall man with a cane standing beside her. And in a tiny speech bubble, one word. "Hi." Lena stared at it. Her breath hitched. Then, without a word, she leaned over and wrapped her small arms around Sophie in a hug so sudden and true it made Maya's vision blur. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped one away with the back of her hand, then looked at Eli. "You're not just kind," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're gifted." Eli shook his head slowly. "No. I'm just someone who learned to listen." And in that quiet diner, surrounded by the smell of toast and the sound of children's whispers, Maya realized something profound. Sometimes, the loudest healing begins in silence. The late afternoon sun had begun to soften, spilling honey-colored light through the diner windows and casting long, quiet shadows across the vinyl booths. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passed, leaves skittered across the sidewalk, a dog barked in the distance. But inside Maggie's, time felt still, wrapped in the warmth of shared silence and the fragile magic of connection. Sophie and Lena were now deep in a game of tic-tac-toe drawn on a napkin, their heads bent close together, whispering strategies like generals plotting a secret mission. Sophie had just drawn a triumphant X in the center square and grinned at Lena, who responded with a shy, crooked smile that made Maya's heart swell. Eli reached for the sugar, his movements careful, deliberate. As he lifted the small ceramic pitcher, his sleeve, worn at the cuff and faded from years of washing, rode up just slightly, revealing a glimpse of skin beneath. And there, etched in dark ink along the inside of his forearm, was a tattoo. Stay calm. Assess. Act. Beneath it, almost hidden, was something else, a thin, frayed hospital ID bracelet, its plastic cracked and yellowed with time, still clinging to his wrist like a memory that refused to let go. Maya's breath caught. She didn't stare, didn't look away too quickly. But her eyes lingered, and Eli noticed. He didn't pull his sleeve down right away. Instead, he set the sugar down and exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself for a door he hadn't opened in a long time. "You were in the hospital?" Maya asked gently, her voice low, respectful. Eli nodded. "Army medic. 2 tours overseas." He paused, his gaze drifting to Sophie, who was now teaching Lena how to draw a crown of flowers. "Last mission, our convoy was hit. Ambush. IED blast. I was in the second vehicle. We didn't see it coming." His voice didn't waver, but something in his eyes dimmed, like a light flickering behind glass. "I got out," he said. "Most didn't." Maya's throat tightened. She could hear the unspoken words beneath his. "I survived. But why me?" "I spent 8 months in rehab," Eli went on. "Physical therapy, nerve damage in my leg, and the other stuff." He didn't name it, but Maya knew. PTSD. Night terrors. Hypervigilance. The invisible wounds that don't show on X-rays. "When I got out," he continued, "civilian life, it didn't fit. Crowds made my chest close up. Sirens, loud noises, flashing lights, anything sudden, anything chaotic. It felt like I was back there. Trapped." He rubbed his temple, then looked at Sophie. "So I started coming to parks. Quiet places. Open spaces. Kids don't expect much. They just are. And when I helped them, when I sat with them, listened, showed them how to skip stones or climb safely, it helped me too." Maya looked at him, not with pity, not with sorrow, but with something deeper. Recognition. "You're not broken," she said softly, firmly. "You're rebuilding." Eli turned to her, his eyes searching hers. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, something shifted in his face, just slightly. A crack in the wall he'd carried for years. And for the first time since Maya had met him, she saw it. Not sadness. Not guilt. Relief. As if, after years of silence, someone had finally spoken the truth he'd been too afraid to say out loud. He looked down at the tattoo on his arm. Stay calm. Assess. Act. The creed of a medic who once saved lives under fire. Then at the frayed hospital bracelet, still clinging to his skin like a scar. He didn't take it off. He didn't need to. Because now, in this quiet diner, with two quiet girls drawing flowers on a napkin and a woman who truly saw him, he realized something. He wasn't just surviving. He was needed. And sometimes, that's the most healing truth of all. The next morning, Pine Hollow Park wore a quiet hush, wrapped in a light mist that curled around the trees like breath in the cold. Dew clung to the grass and the chains of the swings, sparkling under the pale gold of the rising sun. The air was crisp, clean, alive with the promise of something new. Lena stood at the edge of the pond, her small hands clutching a flat stone Sophie had helped her pick. Her breath came in soft puffs as she bent her knees, mimicking Sophie's exaggerated stance. "Like this," Sophie said, her voice bright with excitement. "Flick your wrist, whoosh." She threw the stone. It skipped once, twice, 3 times, before vanishing beneath the surface. Lena giggled. A real giggle. Light, free, unafraid. Maya watched from a short distance, her heart so full it ached. She didn't call out, didn't interrupt. She just stood there, wrapped in the miracle of it, her daughter laughing, playing, trying. Near the bench, Eli leaned on his cane, his face turned toward the pond. A faint smile touched his lips as he watched the girls. The morning light caught the lines around his eyes, not as marks of pain, but of quiet strength, like a map of all he had carried and still kept walking. Maya walked over and stood beside him. Neither spoke at first. They just watched, 2 adults, each shaped by loss, now standing in the glow of something fragile and beautiful growing between their children. Finally, Maya took a slow breath and said, "I run a company. Nova Voice Tech. We design AI speech tools for nonverbal children." Eli turned to her, curious but cautious. "For years," she went on, "I thought the answer was in algorithms. In voice recognition, in neural networks, in machines that could predict what a child wanted to say." She shook her head slightly. "But lately, I've realized we've been building tools without hearts. Machines that listen, but don't understand." She looked at Lena, now proudly showing Sophie a stone she'd just made skip twice. "I want to hire you," Maya said, her voice firm, clear, full of purpose. "Not as a consultant. Not as a diversity hire or a token story. I want you to lead our human connection program. Train our teams. Teach them how to see the child behind the silence. How to listen before they speak. How to be present, not just efficient." Eli stared at her, stunned. His grip tightened on the cane. "Maya, I don't have a degree. I've got a limp, a file full of therapy notes, and a past that still wakes me up some nights. And I've got a daughter," Maya said, turning to him, her eyes blazing with quiet fire, "who just said her first word in 3 years because of you. Who just laughed because you didn't try to fix her. Who just believed in a magic slide because you spoke to her like she already mattered." She stepped closer. "That's the only credential I care about." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant splash of another skipping stone and the soft rustle of leaves. Then Eli looked at Sophie, who was now holding Lena's hand, pointing at a duck gliding across the pond. The 2 girls stood side by side, quiet, connected, speaking without words. He turned back to Maya. His voice, when it came, was low, but steady. "Only if I can bring Sophie with me sometimes. She's part of the team." Maya didn't hesitate. A slow, warm smile spread across her face. "I was hoping you'd say that." And in that moment, beneath the quiet trees of Pine Hollow Park, a new chapter began. Not just for Lena, not just for Eli, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by grief, fear, or war. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices aren't the ones that speak the loudest. They're the ones that help others find their own. The house was quiet when Maya woke, but not the old quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that had filled the rooms for 3 long years, thick with unspoken grief and the echo of a child who had withdrawn from the world. No, this quiet was different. Lighter. Softer. Like the hush before a song begins. And then, from down the hall, she heard it. A sound so small, so unexpected, that at first she thought she'd imagined it. Humming. Off-key. Barely in tune. A child's voice, wandering through a melody with no name, rising and falling like a breeze through open windows. But it was there. Lena was humming. Maya sat up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and joy. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, and moved down the hallway like someone approaching a miracle. The door to Lena's room was slightly ajar. Through the crack, golden morning light spilled across the carpet, catching the dust in the air like floating stars. And there, at her little wooden desk, sat Lena. She was drawing. Crayons were scattered across the paper, red, green, yellow, blue, like a rainbow had exploded across the page. Her small fingers moved carefully, pressing the wax hard into the paper, shaping lines with quiet focus. Her lips moved slightly as she hummed, a tune without words, a song from no memory, just feeling. Maya stood in the doorway, frozen. She didn't call her name. Didn't rush in. Didn't wipe her tears. There were too many to catch. She just watched. Listened. This wasn't just sound. This was life. The last time she had heard Lena hum, she was 4 years old, dancing in her pajamas to a cartoon theme song, her father lifting her high into the air, both of them laughing. That night, the storm, the crash, the silence, had swallowed that moment whole. But now, somehow, it was returning. Maya stepped forward slowly, her breath trembling. She knelt behind Lena, not touching, just near. On the paper, the drawing came into focus. A tall man with a cane stood beside a swing. His face was kind, his eyes gentle. A little girl with curly hair and missing teeth held up a drawing. And in the center, a girl on a swing, her feet off the ground, her hair flying. Above her head, in wobbly, colorful letters, was a speech bubble. It said, "I'm here." Maya's hands flew to her mouth. A sob broke free, soft and raw. Lena turned. She wasn't startled. She just looked at her mother, her eyes wide and clear, no longer clouded by fear or locked in silence. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Instead, she reached for a yellow crayon and handed it to Maya. An invitation. Maya took it with trembling fingers and sat beside her daughter at the small desk. Together, they began to draw. No words, just color, just presence. And all around them, the house, once a museum of grief, frozen in time, began to breathe again. The clock ticked. The sun climbed. A bird sang outside the window. And in the heart of it all, a little girl hummed, a broken melody, imperfect and true, while her mother listened, finally, to the sound of healing. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life in Pine Hollow Park began to change. Not all at once, but like spring melting winter, slow and sure. The air grew warmer. The trees budded. And every Saturday, more children arrived, some speaking in full sentences, others in whispers, some not at all. But all of them came with parents who carried the same quiet hope in their eyes. Maybe today, my child will be heard. Eli stood at the center of it, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a guide. With Sophie beside him, her sketchpad always in hand, her crayons bright as wildflowers, he led small circles beneath the old maple tree. No microphones. No tests. No pressure. Just space. Just listening. At Nova Voice Tech, things were changing too. The sleek, glass-walled offices, once filled with engineers focused only on code and algorithms, now echoed with something new, humanity. Eli didn't give lectures. He held circles. He brought Sophie with him every week, and together, they taught the team what silence could say. "She draws when she's happy," Eli would say, pointing to a sketch of a sun over a playground. "And she taps my arm 3 times when she wants to leave. That's her voice." Engineers who once spoke only in data began to ask different questions. How do we design a tool that respects hesitation? Can an AI learn not to rush? What if the most important word a child says is the one they take their time to find? And slowly, the technology began to change. Not just smarter, but kinder. Lena didn't speak every day. Some mornings, she was quiet, her eyes distant, her hands folded in her lap. But when she did speak, her words were full of weight. Like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through those who loved her. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the sky in streaks of orange and lavender, Eli stood beside Maya at the edge of the swing set. The park was quieting. Parents called out names. Children ran for waiting arms. But Lena and Sophie were still by the pond, braiding daisies into crowns, their laughter floating through the air like wind chimes. "You know," Eli said, his voice low, "I used to think I'd never be useful again." He leaned on his cane, watching the girls. "Like my purpose died in that desert. That I was just broken cargo someone had to carry home." Maya turned to him, her eyes soft in the golden light. "But look at you now." He smiled, not wide, not forced, but deep, like roots finding water after years of drought. "You're not just helping them find their voice," she said. "You're helping yourself." Eli exhaled slowly, his breath a quiet release. "Maybe. I'm starting to believe in quiet magic too." Just then, the girls came running toward them, their hands full of flowers, their faces lit with joy. Sophie placed a lopsided daisy crown on Lena's head. Lena giggled and tried to put one on Eli, nearly knocking his hat off. He laughed, a real, full laugh, the kind that hadn't come easily in years. And as the 4 of them stood there, bathed in the last light of day, something filled the air, something you couldn't measure, couldn't code, couldn't predict. It wasn't just laughter. It wasn't just love. It was hope. Not loud, not flashy, but rising. Like voices, soft, steady, and finally free, speaking louder than words ever could.